There's a new contender for worst year in living memory, and 2020 is barely half over, but not so fast. Here's senior contributor Ted Koppel.
By almost any measure, 1968 was a terrible year for the United States. The bloodiest year in terms of U.S. casualties in Vietnam.
Martin Luther King was shot and was killed tonight in Memphis.
The assassination of Martin Luther King, which sparked rioting and arson in our inner cities. And then, a few weeks later, came the killing of Bobby Kennedy. That summer, the Democratic Convention in Chicago was all but overshadowed by pitched battles between police and anti-war demonstrators.
I think our parents certainly felt that it was never going to be the same again. And that's how I feel now. I mean, I feel great despair.
Kathleen Parker would grow up to become a Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist.
It's across the board where we feel that no one is really quite in charge. And how, in fact, do we want to see someone in charge?
Anna Quinlan, who would go on to win her own Pulitzer Prize for commentary from a more liberal perspective than Parker, was, in 1968, in high school.
In addiction, counselors say all the time that people don't stop self-destructive behavior until they've hit bottom. And sometimes I wonder if this is the United States of America hitting bottom in some ways. And that therefore what history tells us, that from hitting bottom, we can only go up.
He would rise to become the highest ranking officer in the U.S. military.
Our strategy to go after this army is very, very simple.
And ultimately, Secretary of State. At one point, Colin Powell was a likely Republican candidate for president, but in 1968, he was a young Army major serving in Vietnam.
And the country was a mess. And remember also that we were entering a period where we were still in the Cold War, and we were entering a period where we were going to have disappointments in our president and vice president. And we had to let Spiro Agnew go, and then Nixon went. I thought that was about the worst time in my life and in watching the country. But I'll tell you what, the current situation comes close to matching it.
Senator Tom Daschle represented South Dakota for 3 terms between 1987 and 2005. For 10 years, he led Senate Democrats as both minority and Senate majority leader. But in 1968...
From the air, the scene looked unreal.
Yeah, I was in college at the time, and it was my very first trip to Washington. So I have vivid memories of seeing 14th Street and the National Guard out on the streets and the burning buildings and just the extraordinary chaos that was so pervasive. I think the big difference between then and now is how functional government was even under those times versus how dysfunctional it is today. We had a president who was not very popular, primarily because of Vietnam, but was an extraordinary leader on domestic issues. Now we see enormous dysfunction, almost complete paralysis, except I would say for the 4 COVID bills that have been passed, for the most part, Congress is just not working as it should. And we have, of course, a president who's completely dysfunctional.
If in 1968, Vietnam and race were the unavoidable, often unbridgeable issues, now it's race and the pandemic.
I mean, the rest of the world looks at us now. They used to look at us with envy, and now I feel as though they look at us with horror and pity for our inability to get a handle on a pandemic that we, of all countries, should have been able to fight successfully.
If we can't get proper leadership at the federal level, well, then the states and the municipalities are just going to have to do it on their own. I ask you as someone who has spent a lifetime in governance, is that even doable?
The short answer, Ted, is no. I think we've seen examples of good leadership at the gubernatorial and state level, even at the local level at times. And I think they can offset some of the shortcomings of not having national leadership. But you need a national strategy. You need national resources. You need national policy. You need some way of ensuring that the whole country at large is on the same page.
Tom Daschle, the moderate Democrat, and Colin Powell, the centrist Republican, are relics of another political age when compromise was rare but still possible. Would you want to be taking over control of the government right now?
I would just as soon not have to, and no one's about to ask me, but I share your view that COVID is one of the worst things I've ever seen happen to the country because it's not being dealt with properly. I mean, this is a disease, this is the condition that is affecting every single part of the United States of America and the rest of the world for that matter. And so I believe what we ought to be doing is having a national plan, and not each state and each different county going about it their own way, but a national plan executed by the federal government so that we all are doing the same thing.
It's going to take a remarkable person, leader, or groups of leaders across the nation to figure out how to bring this very diverse country. But I think ultimately, I have to be optimistic because we're the United States, right? We have to come back.
When you talk about great leadership, we're down to 2 candidates now.
Yeah.
Do you see great leadership?
So no, I don't see it yet. President Trump, has been a huge disappointment on so many fronts. But the worst, I think, is the fact that he has no qualms about saying things that are intended to disunify the country, intended to antagonize certain groups, and intended to marginalize certain groups. So he's been so bad for this country and so toxic in all those ways. And we can't move forward until we are one again. So the best hope we have right now, I think, is Joe Biden. And that's not to endorse him as a candidate. It's just simply to point out the facts of what we have and what we have to work with going forward.
Where do we go after Election Day when there are going to be tens of millions of people who say, I not only don't like the way this turned out, I don't believe the way it turned out?
I think that there is going to be an unparalleled pressure on national leaders in this country. And I'm not just talking about whoever's president of the United States. I'm talking about members of the Senate, governors, leaders of nonprofit and good government organizations to speak in some sort of non-toxic way, to try to step back from the Twitterverse, which, as far as I'm concerned, has become in many ways the equivalent of the writing on the walls of a public restroom, a venue in which people say things to and about people that they would never say if they were looking them in their eyes.
On balance, come 2021, 2022, is this going to be a good place to live?
My 2 elder grandchildren are half Chinese. My new grandson is a quarter Black. Therefore, they look like America. And I have hopes for that America. But I'm not sure that that's the America of 2021. But when I look at those kids and I think of the future, I don't have any choice but to be hopeful.